let me take a minute and pray for us, and then we'll turn it over to Stephen. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for just this opportunity to be together today. God, leadership is so important for the work that we're doing. You've called us to be leaders and influencers. And God, I just pray that you would teach us today through Stephen. Would you speak to each and every one of us? Would you just challenge us in some areas today? And we just commit this time to you and pray that you would bless it and make it special. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Stephen, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's really great to be with you. A couple of things. I'll start with a little bit about myself here. And I am the founder and principal director of an organization called Center. My website is findmycenter.net. I'll give you this information at the end as well for you if you want to reach out to me afterwards. But as I'm beginning, if one of the things that would actually be really, really helpful for me is if you would all just take a moment in the chat box. I forgot I was going to tell you, Jonathan, I was going to have him do this. But if you would all in the chat box just say one line about what your organization is, that will help me as we kind of keep moving forward. Because when we get to times where we'll have opportunity to dialogue together, that'll just give me just a tiny little bit of context. So as you're doing that, let me share some context of myself. I was a pastor for over 25 years. I've recently started this new consulting organization called Center, and I have a doctorate in leadership from George Fox University in leadership in the emerging culture that I completed a number of years ago. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes, but the thing that really you probably need to know more than anything about me today is that Jonathan and I are friends from clear back in the college days. We went to college together back on the East Coast. And if the only thing that we communicate about after this seminar is over is that you would like some stories about Jonathan that you've never heard, you reach out to me because I've got a bucket full of them. So that's probably the greatest piece of information you may get in today's seminar. So there you go. I don't know if you want a rebuttal on that, Jonathan, or not, but because you might have some stories about me too, so I should be careful.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna stay silent on that one. So
anyway, great to have you all here with us. We're so glad that you could join us. Leadership is one of my real passions. And so I'm excited about sharing some of this information with you today. And I do hope for it to be really interactive. We'll pause a number of points along the way for us to be able to have just some fun kind of dialogue, questions, conversation together as we go. So as Jonathan said, this information is called the Leadership Crucible. This is some material that I developed. It started when I was working on writing my doctoral dissertation, but I want to kind of start from a more of a broad place here. I don't know if you have, if you're nerdy like I am, but if you use the Google and you type in simply what is leadership into that search bar, the number of things that pop up are unbelievable. I have seen everything. These are some of the descriptors of leadership that are on page 1 of that Google search. Visionary leadership, servant leadership, transformational leadership, strategic leadership, thought leadership, and those are just categories. And when I was in my doctoral program, one of my primary mentors was a gentleman named Dr. Leonard Sweet, and he used to say, how do you know you're leading? Well, you turn around and you see if anyone is following. That's sort of the purest definition of leadership that there, I guess, possibly is. But that doesn't that helps us know when it's happening, but it doesn't necessarily help us in understanding how we help cultivate that and what it looks like for us to be able to really move forward in that together. And so I began about 15 years ago really wrestling with this question instead of what is leadership. I began wrestling with the question, what is the essence of leadership? And as I continued to wrestle with those ideas, it led me to a concept that I have now developed called the Crucible, the Leadership Crucible. And it led me to this idea of the metaphor of the crucible. Anybody know what a crucible is and is willing to kind of unmute yourself and share with us what it is and how it works? Anybody have any ideas about that? Nobody taking a stab this morning? You're all bashful? Okay. All right. So a crucible is if you think about those like iron ore refineries, those big vats that they heat up, they put the element inside of it, the unrefined ore, then they heat it up, and then the impurities get taken off the top. And what you're left with is you're left with the essence of whatever the element is that you're refining. And so I began to kind of play around with this idea of what would happen if we took all of the different ideas and conceptualizations of leadership and we threw them into a crucible like that, and we cranked the heat up, and we tried to begin to discover what in the world might be left over when you get rid of all of the extraneous stuff. Now, one of the easiest ways for you to understand how the crucible works is to think about gold, right? Like you've heard of 10 karat gold, 18 karat gold, 24 karat gold, and the 24 karat is more refined than the 18. Well, that's again the idea. What happens if we take all this stuff with leadership, we throw it into the crucible, we turn up the heat, and by the way, let's just pause for a second and recognize that life has a way of cranking up the heat, whether we want it to or not. Can I get a witness on a global pandemic right now? We won't talk about politics, but how about just a pandemic, right? Life has a way of creating some pretty significant heat sources. And so when the heat gets turned up, what's really at the core, right? That's the idea behind this with the concepts related to leadership. So as I really began to wrestle with that, and with this group of folks, I can also share with you that some of the significant wrestling that I did with that was based on Jesus' teachings on the kingdom of God in the Gospels. As Jesus taught on the kingdom of God being his primary metaphor, what do we see and what can we learn about what the essential elements are of effective or authentic leadership if you were just to take and boil everything else off? What is at the very heart and core of what is real, good, authentic leadership? And from that, based on what Jesus taught, how he lived, I have developed these 6 essential elements, and they work in doublets together, which we'll go through. What we're going to do is we're going to go through 2 at a time, and then we'll pause after we've done 2 and then have some dialogue, and because they work together, each of the doublets. But we have followership and settledness. That's at the very beginning, at the very center of the element. Then we have discipline and courage that work together to help produce momentum and movement. And then we have empowerment and renewal. And that's the way that we connect with others and we make this sustainable. So that's where we're headed. We're going to talk about those 6 elements together this morning in the time we have left. So let's just start with followership. This followership is the idea that everyone is following something. The critical question is, what? So whether or not we want to admit this, there is something that becomes a baseline primary motivator for who we are and how we function and exist in our worlds. And if we can begin to get honest and real about identifying what that is, it can then help to actually give shape and form to who we are and to where we're going. When I talk about this with business leaders, I tend to use the concept of true north or motivations, like what are your primary motivations? But one of the fun things for me about working with this group this morning is knowing that you all are a part of Christian organizations is fun, because it allows me to talk to you about the fact that for us, we just get in line behind Jesus, right? Like he becomes who we are following. We don't ever have to take a step that he hasn't already taken. And that's what becomes our sourcing then, is who God is in our life. That becomes the foundation for our reality of who we are. So the followership conversation is a little bit easier with a group like this, because we don't have to do as much wrestling about what that looks like for us, because that's who we are. We are first followers in line, right behind the Trinity and where they're headed and what they're doing. But we have to pay attention to that. We have to say, and we have to continue to ask questions that bring us to a place where we say, what does it mean for us to stay lined up to that? To not get, to allow drift to happen, to allow our course to begin to kind of drift from that true, authentic followership. So that's why it's always the first element. And we have to keep revisiting that, coming back to it, saying, where am I? Who am I? Where am I going? And how am I doing at following what are my true north, my primary motivations? Which then that leads us then into the next element, which is, I almost stopped working there for a second. So the next element then becomes settledness, because once I know what my sourcing is and I'm grounded in that sourcing, that then is how I begin to understand who I really am. And so for me, settledness is the concept that says, I'm settling into knowing who I am uniquely designed and created to be in this world. So it's about understanding and accepting. Boy, I keep having sorry, this 2-screen format here is a little new to me today, and apparently I have to have my cursor in the exact right spot in order for it to keep moving forward. So I think I got it figured out now. Anyway, this is about understanding and accepting your unique and creative design, knowing that I am not like anybody else. I am who I am. It's based on who my source says I am. That's the followership piece. But knowing that I'm unique in this world, I'm unique in this place, and I have a unique design that I'm called to fill and understand in this world. So this is a part of why I like to talk about authentic leadership versus things like strengths-based or weakness-based leadership, because this is about really understanding the uniqueness of who we are and being authentic to the design of who we have been created to be by our Creator. So and one of the things that's important for us to understand here is, and when I dig deep into this work with people on settledness, we spend a lot of time talking about the difference between identities and roles. So I have a lot of roles that I fill in my life. I wear a dad hat, I wear a spouse hat, I've worn a pastor hat, I wear a consultant hat now. There's all these different hats that I wear. Those are roles that I fill in my life, but those are not who I am. who I am gets lived out uniquely into those various roles that I have. And if I can find a place where my followership is settled, and now I'm settled into the uniqueness of who I am, then what I do is I bring the fullness of who I am into all of the different roles that I fill. So that means that our identity and our settledness is driven from an internal reality, not from any external realities or roles that we may be filling. Now, one of the things that happens when these two then work in partnership together is it begins to help simplify our yes and our no. Because if I know where I'm going because of who I'm following or what I'm following, so when you take these ideas and you apply it as an illustration to your organization, followership is the mission, right? This is what we are attempting to accomplish. Right? That's what we're trying to do. And settledness is about knowing who we are uniquely in attempting to accomplish that. And so when we know those things, not just about our organization, but also about us as individuals, it begins to really simplify our ability to say yes to things or no to things. Because as things come to us, we can say, okay, well, does that line up with what I'm following and with who I know I'm uniquely designed and created to be in the world? Does that fit with the vision and the mission of who we are as an organization? Does it fit with that? Yes, no, right? See, the clarity of these two central pieces from the very beginning begins to really help to simplify what we say yes to and how easy it is and it can be for us then to say no to things. That might be good, but that doesn't fit exactly who I am, who I've been designed and created to be, and where we're headed together in this world. So that's the first two pieces. So I'd love to pause here and see if, kind of look through the chat window here. So we have some, Hope Women's Center, so cool, International Christian Ministry, Discipleship Rural Church Asia and Africa, that's awesome. Harvest Compassion Center, that's okay. Man in the churches disciple their men more effectively, very cool. Pregnancy Center, cool. RYFO, I think I've met somebody at the very beginning about that. Awesome. Full Spectrum of the Family, very cool. Hope Kids, love it. Okay, so that gives me some context. So that's super, super helpful. So what kind of, as you've heard me sort of talk initially about the idea of the crucible, about how it works, and then about these first two elements, what kind of things are bubbling up for you? What ideas do you have? What questions might you have? What thoughts would you love to share? And we'll just take a pause for several minutes and just have a little bit of dialogue together.
Stephen, I'll jump in. It's Jonathan.
Sure. Great.
Connected with settledness.
Yeah.
I think something that you said there really resonated with me, and that is we have different roles, right? We're for lack of a better word, forced right into a number of different roles.
Right.
But it's who we are, it's who we're following, it's our true identity that then plays out into those roles. I guess I've never really thought about it like that. Right. I wear the dad hat as well. And you tend to think, man, how do I be a great dad? You know?
Right.
But it actually starts before that. Right.
Correct.
It's who am I and what am I following? Or in this case, who am I following? And then how does that shape and form me? Because that's what's going to come out when I am right to make it sound official, when I am operating as a dad.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So exactly. I think that's really intriguing there. And I think for me, just a great reminder from a followership standpoint. Just this week, somebody, I was in a small group and somebody was talking about when Jesus was talking about not worrying about tomorrow and saying, why do you run after this? Why do you run after this? Why do you chase this down? And then right, that little challenging sentence that says that's what the pagans do, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and so I somebody was reading that, and I just internalized that and thought to myself, Jonathan, are you trusting in God? Are you following Jesus, or are you doing what the pagans do? And I think for me, that's a real challenge, because I think we can get off base a little bit and forget who we're following, what that's supposed to look like, and how that's supposed to play out. And so just a number of great connections for me here. I don't know that I have a specific question, but just a number of points that really landed. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love those thoughts. I love those thoughts. The fun, when you begin to differentiate the idea between identity and roles, the truth is that that's really easy to see with you and I, right? We both wear or fill the role of dad in our life. And you don't serve as a dad the exact same way that I serve as a dad. And that's because I'm unique and so are you. And it doesn't mean that your version of dad or my version of dad is right or wrong. It's that we get to bring the fullness of who each of us are uniquely designed to be into that role as we live that out with our kids.
Yeah. And when we bring this,
one way to illustrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we bring this into the context of leadership, right, everybody on this call wears the leadership hat as well. And so we tend to say, let's learn about leadership. Let's, be this or do this. And that's important. We need to do that. We need to study leadership. But again, for me, the concept of it almost starts way before that. Again, who are we? Who are we following? What's our settledness? And then that's going to play itself out in leadership. So anyway, just great stuff there.
Yeah, that's good.
Stephen, can I piggyback on what Jonathan said?
I love your comment. Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah, by the way, Eloise, thanks for that. If you give us your kid's email address, I'll be happy to email them and tell them how awesome you are. So thanks for that. That's amazing. Go ahead. Yeah, tell me what your name is.
This is Simeon Lorman with RIFO. I was just feeling like, I was feeling Jonathan's, spot on with the settledness piece is resonant for me as well. And just thinking about building our team and, recognizing that, you can create an org chart, you can create lots of roles and then fit people to the role. Or you can create roles around who you know people to be. And so there's kind of the tailoring of something that actually is right sized based on how God's designed somebody, their natural passions and giftedness, versus just kind of trying to, force something because it makes sense from a standpoint of like, this is what our org chart needs to be. Ideally, these are the kind of people we need in certain seats. And so I think there's a level of care for your people if you're tailoring things to really who they are versus, forcing them to fit the mold of like, well, this is the title, this is the thing. And I think we have, we do each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, a great service to know each other well enough to be able to have that kind of intention in the invitations that we make, come in and fill this space with who you are, how God's made you. And so I think that kind of invitation is more winsome and sustainable.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it. Such a cool, such a very, very cool take on that. That's really, really good. And it's interesting because then what can begin to happen is if you begin to think about the way that those two things can play in together, because it's not as if org charts are bad, right? Because this, in a life of an organization, there are different roles that need to get done and fulfilled. But you can begin even then thinking about who is the unique kind of a person that is already designed to fill that kind of a role and invite them to do that in a way that makes sense to who they're designed and created to be, than just saying, well, we just need to plug it. Now it's not widgets, right? Now it's not like, well, I just need this widget to fit in that hole because that's what we need, right? Now it is much, much more about the uniqueness of the individual, their unique design. One of the fun things that I can talk about with this group too is that when I do this deep work with folks especially in the realm of settledness, what we get to talk about when we all sort of share the same Christian language together is we can talk about the fact that we each have our own unique Imago Dei imprint on each of us. So the very image of God that is uniquely imprinted. It's almost like God's thumbprint that is unique for each one of us that we get to then begin to discover and live into, which is just such a cool, fun thing to be able to do with folks along the way. All right, yeah, love that comment there. It's not an either or, looking at uniqueness and roles. That's really awesome. Thanks, Heather. Any other thoughts or questions from anybody before we keep moving? I wanted to be able to create plenty of room for us to dialogue together. So, I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day long, but I also think there's a lot of power in the wrestle too. So that's good.
Stephen, I do have a question related particularly to followership. You talked in settledness about the specific things that you do to help people. But even though as Christians we have a king and we have a Lord and we are saying we are following him, there still is a lot of challenges for us because different sources come in and we get divided over a lot of different ideas and philosophies that are there. So what do you do that helps people, particularly that are Christians, to stay aligned to not just that ultimate followership of the kingdom, but how that plays out down in more of the details of what we're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Heather. And with folks that are followers of Christ, what that involves a lot of conversations related to questions of values and of what are the things that are again, we still have the motivation question, because it's like, what are the things about following God that are this is the stuff that wakes me up and gets me going, and really, because that so much then it leads and plays into the uniqueness of who we then become. So it has much to do with questions related to values and motivation and what we see as are the kind of the central realities of what it means to be that authentic follower, because that's why there's such a 1-2 punch there. They play into each other so significantly. So when I do the deeper work with people in that one, it's always related to the question of values and motivations is what we get at. Great question. Great question. Yeah. And that's a hard question for a lot of folks, actually, to begin to start to really, really wrestle with some of that, because it can become simple to say, well, I just follow Jesus, right? Well, okay, but there's a lot more to it, as you have just alluded to, than just that. So that's a great, great reflection on that. Appreciate it so much. All right. Well, unless somebody else has got something burning on your mind and your heart, we'll give another pause for just a half a second, and then we'll dive into the next two. All right. Well, then let's keep going. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move down here toward the bottom of the elements, and we're going to talk together about discipline and courage. And these two work together, which I'll talk more about after I've kind of laid out each of them. But these two work together to begin to create a movement and momentum. So discipline is really about the idea of just simple hard work and getting things done. There is this sense in which, the spreadsheet isn't going to write itself. The meeting agenda isn't just going to somehow materialize. One of the roles actually that I filled for a number of years here in our community was I did some adjunct professor work, and I taught a couple different courses on preaching. And one of the concepts that I used in the preaching course that I have used also with leaders just at all levels of organizations is this idea of seat time, that you sometimes just need to be able to put yourself in the seat, or put your seat in the seat, and you gotta just do the work. You've got to get to it. You got to write, you got to dig in, you got to create the spreadsheet, you have to make the agenda, you have all of those kind of things are a part of what it means to be a leader, is to engage in the discipline of doing the work. That, though, gets coupled and paired very, very closely with courage. And courage is the ability to take guided, bold action in response to clear followership and settledness. So this is the idea that says that I know where I'm going, I know who I am, and I know that as a part of where we are going, I'm being called, I'm being challenged. I can see that this is a decision that needs to be made, and that decision is going to involve risk. And I've got to be willing to be the person who takes that risk. Now, in order to do this, we have to be willing to also embrace a concept of that failure is not fatal. That some of our greatest lessons that we have learned in our life have learned when things haven't worked out exactly the way that we have wanted them to. And courage is a willingness to say, I'm going to act, I'm going to react, I'm going to risk, recognizing that movement is better than sitting still. And we might be able to discover something by moving this direction that then we can make a slight adjustment as we're moving. So, and again, this is why I say that these are the twin engines that work together to help create movement and momentum, both for us and for our organizations. It's digging in, doing the work, and having the courage to act when we know what it is that we're supposed to act on that's based on our settledness and followership. Now, the best illustration for this, which is just an awesome illustration for this group, is, and my favorite actually, is the story of Joshua and the people of Israel as they're moving into the promised land and they encounter the city of Jericho. So Joshua has already had, at the beginning of that book, in Joshua 1, you would recognize those famous words of be strong and courageous, you are my leader, right? So Joshua has already settled that and said, I'm following whether you guys all come along or not. So he has nailed the followership issue, and he has gotten settled into knowing who he is as who God has said that he is as the leader. Now we're facing Jericho. He's taking a walk outside the camp. He encounters the servant of the Lord and says, whose side are you on? And he's like, you're asking the wrong question there. This isn't about sides. This is about, are you still going to follow and be settled into who you are? And if you are, then now it's time to actually act on that reality. And so then this servant gives Joshua the craziest battle plan in the history of all battle plans. You're going to walk around this city once a day, every day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, you're going to walk around it 7 times. And then you're going to yell and blow horns and the whole thing's going to come crashing down. And there you go. There's the plan. I'll see you later. Have fun with that. All right. Now, can you imagine the courage that it took for Joshua to go back to the camp and say to these people, well, here's the plan I think we need to implement, right? Like, talk about a significant amount of courage, but the courage wasn't something that he simply had to muster up in himself. The courage came from his followership and his settledness. And then he didn't just say, look, here's the plan, you all walk around the wall. No, Joshua walked around the wall with the people. He actually engaged in the work. So this to me is one of the most beautiful examples of this story that comes out of there's lots of them, but it's one of my favorites stories from the text that illustrate how these work together, because then what happened is this is what created the movement and the momentum that got the people moving into the promised land. But it had to come from a place of discipline and courage, and know that, look, we just got to risk here. We got to take the steps. We got to follow this wild and crazy battle plan because we think this is what we're supposed to do. So that's a brief overview there of the ideas of discipline and courage and how they can work together and are rooted in followership and settledness. I went through that pretty quick, but I wanted to be able to give us plenty of time to be able to have some dialogue about all that together. So what questions, thoughts, ideas do you all have as you've listened to me talk a little bit about these two parts of authentic leadership?
Stephen, I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, love that. So my question is, right, oftentimes we need to muster up the courage to do, from a leadership standpoint, what we know is right, or what we know God might be calling us to do, even if it sounds like a crazy battle plan, or we're not sure if it's going to work out. But I guess my question then is connected with the failure is not fatal concept.
Right.
Sometimes we don't know that clearly, right? And so sometimes we've got to take some risks and try some things. So can you just talk a little bit about sort of the role of risk taking as leaders, and how we should be looking at that, and maybe another part of the question is, right, what if we're not 100% sure, which really we never can be, I think, unless we've heard directly from God to do something. We're not 100% sure. So what do we do then? And I like your concept of what it means to still move a little bit and to do something and to try something and to learn from that. So can you just talk a little bit about that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is, especially as you think about it from this perspective of the failure is not fatal, is that we have to recognize that the greatest failure really that we could have is to just do nothing, is to just not act at all. And if we can get over the hurdle of thinking that we have to get it perfect before we start, there's a reason why, there's version 1.0 and then 2.0 and then 2.0A and then 3.485621 or whatever, you know what I mean? Is because what happened was we said, let's start, let's get moving. And that's a part of what I think is involved in that risk taking, is saying, well, let's get going and we will learn as we go, right? That's part of the idea behind this failure is not fatal. We have to be willing to start and get going some direction. And we can course correct as we go. We can modify, we can make changes, we can, those kind of things. So that really, failure is not fatal, is about embracing a perspective that says, I don't have to do it perfect every single time. It's about learning to let go of a perfectionism ahead of time, that I have to get it right before we even start. So that's one of the things that I talk about a lot with leaders, in this idea of courage is you're going to learn more in moving than you are in just trying to figure out all the scenarios from right here. So you have to let go of that idea of we have to figure it out perfectly before we can even start.
I love what you just said. That's going to stick with me. We learn more in moving.
Yes.
I sometimes, from a leadership standpoint, we feel like we can't move forward or take a step until we have that crystal clear plan. And we're just not always going to have that. So we learn more in moving. I love that. I think that's a huge concept here. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And with the whole idea of the 100% not sure, that plays right into that. I don't know anybody that is 100% sure before they take a step on anything, right? You know, like I remember, this is going to be a silly illustration of this, but it fits, I think. I remember when early on in my marriage, my wife and I were thinking about having kids, and the idea of, you know, like I was a youth pastor at the time, right? So I'm like, I don't know about this whole, you know, parenting teenagers, you know, whatever, right? And so my brother, in his older wisdom, he said to me, he said, well, you don't have to be ready to be the parent of a teenager. You just have to be ready to be the parent of an infant. I was like, oh, right. Okay, that's right. I guess I'm going to grow as a parent as I go along too. And that's, you know, why with our oldest, we always said, look, we're learning just right alongside of you. So we'll add an extra, you know, pile into your therapy account for later. It'll be fine. We'll be all right. You know, so yeah, but that's a part of that process, right? Like, is that we learn so much as we're going, but we have to have the courage to get going. And it's often that first step that's the biggest hurdle.
Could I say something?
Yeah, please, Eloise. That would be fantastic.
Jonathan, thank you so much for asking that particular question and focusing on that, because that is huge for me. Thinking and trying to plan things, and as I'm planning, make sure it's correct, that this should be done this. But that focus, everything you guys said, really, really encouraged me. And I love the movement. Because if you're just sitting. I mean, you're not going to get anything done. So I just love everything that's just been said. I just wanted to say that out loud.
Well, thank you, Eloise. I appreciate that so much. And if you go back to my original quote, that sort of was from my mentor, one of my mentors, Dr. Sweet, that said, how do you know you're leading? Well, you turn around and see if you have anybody following. If you're sitting still, I don't know that anybody's following sitting still.
Yes, loved it. I loved it. You see who's following you. Absolutely, that's great.
So good, yeah. And Simeon, I love your idea there about the interplay between the elements. Let me just address that for just a second. I love your connection there between followership is related to the courage, and then our settledness can be related to the discipline. There certainly is a link there. I actually feel that like both of those, the followership and the settledness, play at work together in the way we go about both our discipline and our courage. So, but I love your thought there about how with discipline, it's the work that I do is unique to who I am. And that really is kind of the settlership or the settledness piece. And then courage is, I'm not taking courage that I'm mustering up myself. I'm acting in courage on what I know I'm being called to. So there's a vision that's ahead of me that gives me the courage to say, let's go. One of the things that I say often with people with courage, and that's part of the reason why I love the Joshua example, is Joshua didn't say to the people, you go walk, and I may have alluded to this. He said, I'm following, I'm going to go get in line, and I'd love for you to go with me. So there was a let's come along together, even as we follow God's plan together. So that's super, super cool. Heather, what kind of things are popping? It looks like the chat room is popping a bit there. What are you noticing for me?
Yeah, I think it's just different reactions to Simeon's response, and a lot of thumbs up from what's been saying is that we definitely need grace in the process to be able to have courage to fail.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Brene Brown's work, one of the leading researchers on shame and resilience. And she has a concept that she uses in some of her work that she calls believing in the best in people, including ourselves. And that's one of the things that becomes at play in this failure is not fatal, is a willingness to just give ourselves lots and lots of grace, and to give our team lots of grace that says, I really do think we're all doing the best that we can with what we have under the circumstances. And when we can believe in the best in ourselves and in others, it also helps to, I think, embolden our courage and our ability to kind of move forward in all of that. So love that idea of giving lots of grace to ourselves. So good.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well.
Sure.
John Ortberg said something a while back in a book that really resonated with me and continues to resonate with me.
Yeah.
And it's just a little observation from his standpoint that's been pretty big for me. And that is, he just said, we need to remember that God knows how small and weak we really are. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, God knows that about us. And so I think there are times for me where I just remind myself of that. I don't get something right, or I didn't get clear direction, or I messed something up, or I reacted in a way I shouldn't have reacted. And I just say to myself, oh man, Jonathan, at the end of the day, you are small and you are weak. But God knows that. And God not just still loves me, but accepts me as a leader. And I need to love and accept myself and try to get it right and better the next time. And so, I think, again, connecting with Bridget's point, man, we are so quick, or at least we should be so quick to give others grace. And sometimes we're really good at that. But sometimes we're just terrible at giving ourselves grace and space and patience and being patient toward ourselves. So I think that's a big reminder for each and every one of us, specifically as leaders.
Yeah, so good. So good. That's awesome. Love it. All right. Well, let's tackle the last two, and then we'll see what other ideas those spark. All right. So our final two elements then are empowerment and renewal. And when I talk about empowerment, I think that this is a critical element here, is to recognize that true empowerment acknowledges and honors the fullness of the other's power. So when I'm teaching this in depth with people and working on this with them as they especially work with teams, one of the things that I talk to them about is that empowerment is not about sharing power or giving power, but it's about inviting the power that others already have for them to use the power that they have. Now, with this group, again, I can talk to you about where I believe that fundamentally is rooted, which is the fact that all of us are empowered by the Spirit. And that with the Spirit, everybody has the power that they need in order for them to function in the fullness of who they are. I don't somehow need to share my power with you. No, you already have everything you need. What I need to do is I need to encourage you to use the power that you have, create space. When I'm working with leaders, especially leaders that are working with teams, this is where we talk a lot about what does it look like for you to create space to allow your team members to use the power that they have. And we get into conversations and dialogue together about things like, what does authority look like? How do you allow people to take responsibility for what's theirs? All of those layers of questions that are a part of this conversation. But one of the fundamental things that I think is important to recognize here is that one of the greatest ways that we empower others is when we can encourage and invite them to wrestle with their own issues of followership, with them, encouraging them to get settled into the uniqueness of who they are, and invite them to exercise their own discipline and their own courage in the arena of life where they are, in the arena of the organization where they are. That's some of the greatest empowerment work that I can actually do with others, is that I invite them to do those fundamental pieces of the work, and then say, great, go for it, right? Like I used to, when I was in a previous role and I had this team of folks that regularly worked with, and they created a, kind of in a joking way, they had this little flip chart on a little tablet of paper that they would pull out every once in a while. And it just had all of my standard responses on it that they were all so used to hearing, that they had come to understand what that was going to be. And it was things like, great, go for it. What can I do to help you? You know what I mean? It's all these things. It was like, I want to just permission, and say, I want you to live into the fullness of who you are. And I'm here just to simply help you be all that you can be in that process. So to me, that's what empowerment is. And then renewal is the final piece. And this is what it means for us to find balance in renewal through rest. And again, with part of what I love when I do this with all followers of Jesus, is it's easy for me to talk about the fact that this is rooted in our concepts of Sabbath and sabbatical, is that we are able to find sustainability through God's design of Sabbath, which is not about just stopping. It's about the renewal that comes when we stop. And so, one of the things that I talk about a lot with leaders in this realm is recognizing that you are also going to be able to find what are the individual personal pathways that help you find renewal for yourself. This is about really critical self-care. It's going to look different for different individuals, but your ability to find the rhythms of life that help create and provide sustainability for you is what's going to keep you working as an effective leader in the long run. And that often is one of those things that can feel very, very counterintuitive. I think sometimes we think that self-care is selfish, but there's a big difference between being selfish and engaging in self-care. And self-care is what keeps our tank full so that I have something to give. And that's not ever, ever a selfishness. That's about allowing myself to have a sense of renewal and ongoing renewal that keeps me in a place of wellness and wholeness so that I can keep working and functioning as a leader. Now, the fun thing about these two and the way that these two are related together are I call these the branches and the roots, because empowerment are the branches that reach out and help us as we connect with others. And the renewal are the roots that go deep, that help us to stay grounded and be secure as we're moving forward as leaders. So this is the way that we connect with others powerfully, and then also the way that we stay grounded ourselves is the empowerment and the renewal pieces as they work together in this idea of kind of being branches and roots as we move forward. So those are those two pieces. So love for us to kind of pause here for a second and or a few minutes and talk about what those sparked, what ideas those sparked for you.
It's interesting, Stephen, when you talk about renewal as a self-care initiative, I see empowerment as an others care initiative.
Yes.
And so on both sides of this, there's, that analogy of branches and roots is that, are you cultivating health, at depths and also a fruitfulness? And so I think that there's almost a pastoral element that just encompasses these two, pieces of the bigger picture that is caring for your own vitality and then also how you're coming alongside others. So
yes,
I love the relationship there is awesome.
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly, you are picking up what I'm throwing down. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I really like the concept of when you connect it back with Sabbath and rest. The purpose is not to stop. The purpose is to be renewed. And so I think that's a really great distinction. Sometimes as leaders, we are always feeling like we need to go, and not just physically, but I think we have a really, really difficult time shutting our minds down.
Yep.
And so sometimes we will, quote unquote, unplug and get away from it all, right? We might be able to do that, but we can do that and still not have that be renewing time for us.
Correct.
Right? So there is a difference there. So what renews us, what fills our tank, what rejuvenates us, what energizes us so that we can tackle what's in front of us moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really challenging concept, because I know for me, I will force myself to, quote unquote, take a break or step away. But it seems, based on what you're saying, it really matters what that time looks like. And is it actually restful? Is it rejuvenating? And is it energizing me for what God wants me to do in the days ahead? So really, really love that.
Yeah. Two thoughts there to kind of take it to just another layer. When you think about this idea being rooted in the original concepts of Sabbath, and you think about like some of the instructions that God gave to the people of Israel as they were headed into the promised land, in particular, the ways in which they were to care for the land. He established that every 7 years, you're supposed to allow the ground to lie fallow. And what's interesting about that is that if you think about what is happening with the ground, it looks like nothing is happening, at least above the ground, that there's literally no activity going on. But what's really happening is what's happening underneath, and all of the renewal with the nutrients that are happening underneath the surface that is actually bringing about the renewal in the land so that it can then do what it was designed and created to do. So that's just another way of thinking about that idea. And then another metaphor that I use a lot with people, I use this metaphor a lot, is that idea of all of us have kind of an internal, what I call an emotional or soul care tank. And I don't know any leader that is functioning in a way in which a significant portion, if not all of their role as leader, is pouring themselves out for others. But this tank has a limit. It has a limit to it. There is not an unlimited capacity here that we just naturally have. And so as we pour ourselves out for others, if we aren't also figuring out what we need to be doing in order to be refilling on a regular basis that tank, we will get to the point where that tank is empty. And now we're trying to pour ourselves out from that place of just what we call fumes, right? Like we all acknowledge, we all recognize this metaphor, and we've all felt on the edge of that at times in our lives, so renewal is about learning what are those personal pathways that are the things that help refill that tank. Because as a leader, I don't think I can help but pour myself out for others. That's the nature of the beast. But if I'm not also figuring out how to pour back in, I'm in deep, deep trouble in the long haul of things. That is not sustainable for the long haul. Any other thoughts or questions from anybody about those?
Yes, Stephen, this is Heidi from the Harvest Compassion Center.
Great. Hi, Heidi.
Yes, hello. Nice to meet you. You're doing a fabulous job. Thank you so much. Taking lots of notes.
Sure. Yeah, good.
So yes, so we are a local food and clothing bank, and through the pandemic, we are seeing just a whole new demographic, and we normally hear stressful stories, but right now we are hearing very, very high stress stories, and it's particularly domestic violence, child abuse. So we have many people coming in each week from these situations. So we appreciate everyone's partnerships. See you there, Tammy. Thank you. But it's there's an emotional stress factor about what we all do, you know, in nonprofit, especially faith-based, and we obviously all bring our hearts every day we come to work. So there is that, I call it like compassion, but with parameters, just so that we can self-preserve, you know, like that self-preservation that, you know, and, you know, I love one speaker said, you know, you are a stop in that person's journey. You're not their end, you know, so to know that they're coming to, God has brought them to you, and whatever resources you can provide, however you can help them is great. And then, but that's your special time with them. And then, you know, you send them along, but with your greatest wishes and prayers. And they, you know, for us, we help every 30 days or sooner. Depending on the circumstance, and they'll come back, you know, so they wish. So, but again, I think there are some days that you come home and it's like, okay, you know, now I've got the mom hat, and and so it's you know, and it's like you have to replenish in that 15-minute drive home, you know, and say, okay, I've got to, you know, let this be, and you know, and then refresh and come back tomorrow. So yeah, I think that self-care is so important, you know, because you do have to be strong, you know, for us, for the people we serve, for our volunteers, for our donors who walk in, for the community, you know, whatever role you're in. So so I love everything that you've said about that and how important it is in the work we do.
Yeah, so good. It's one of those things that is when we were talking earlier about the idea of being graceful to ourselves, it's one of the pieces that's also the most challenging, especially for those of us that are involved in the regular giving away of ourselves to others, is that we will regularly put ourselves at the back of that list of who needs taken care of. But if we always put ourselves at the back of the list and we don't figure out what are the kinds of rhythms of renewal that are important for me, eventually there's not anybody on the list who's going to get anything from me, because I'm not going to have anything left to give.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So it's another act of grace for ourselves that is, I think, a really powerful recognition that that when we engage in those renewing activities, that is a way that we're giving grace to ourselves as well. So really, really good. Love it.
Good. Thank you.
Love it. So good. Such trying times. I'm a part of the governing board for our local domestic violence shelter here in my town, and it is challenging days in that arena for sure right now. So I resonate with you today for sure.
Stephen, I've got a question on sort of a meta level.
Yeah, great.
If this is the essence, what are the things that need to be boiled off? You know, from the standpoint of the things that are attaching to our leadership, that are distracting, kind of the whirlwind stuff we get stuck in, and like those places that we've lost the essence, you know, where have we drifted from what matters? And so I'm curious, as you've thought about the heating process and the things that need to fall off, what those entanglements might sound like from your perspective.
Yeah, that's really good. I one of the things that I talk about with people related to this is this isn't an idea of what's a new model for leadership. This is about understanding what is at the actual heart of leadership. And then you can take what's at the heart and you can apply it to different kinds of models. So I think where we've gotten off track at some points is we have forgotten we've thought more about the form than we have about the essence. So we thought more about how do I, and again, these aren't bad things, right? Like, how do I engage in learning more emotional intelligence, right? Like that is a really, really critical piece of what it means. But I see that rooted in understanding my settledness, not in place of, right? It's a part of what it means to be settled, is becoming more emotionally intelligent about who I am, the way I was designed and created, that kind of thing. So that that doesn't become a substitute for me being a settled person. I don't know if that helps, if that makes sense at all. So for me, it's that we have attached the idea of leadership more to models than we have to what the essence actually is. So that was a meta answer to a meta question, I think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Just we're moving away from models that we can get stuck in, and they fail us at some point, right? They only take us down the journey so far, and now that model is disrupted, and it's just not right fitting anymore. So I think that's helpful from that perspective. Yeah.
And I did appreciate your question in the chat about their diagnostic tools. Yes, I absolutely have. I've created a number of those where I will do deep dives with people and teams, organizations on the different layers here and what does it look like to cultivate that in all 6 of these different elements and arenas with people. I would simply finish today with this. I know we're just about out of time, so let me finish with a couple of things here really quick. I never like to present this material without encouraging you to consider one of these. And whenever I attend seminars or webinars or workshops, that kind of stuff, I always feel like I come away from that stuff with it's almost like there's so much that's rolling around. Like I don't even know where to start sometimes. So whenever I present this material in kind of this overview to folks, I always like to end with this question. So pick one and don't worry about the rest of them for the next month, right? Like what one of these areas or arenas really, really resonated with you today for where you are, for the uniqueness of who you are, like how could you grow by focusing on one of these for the next month, that it would allow you to really kind of keep moving in your own journey. And I would just encourage you in that, is that I wouldn't even worry about the other 5. Pick one and lean into that one in the next couple of weeks. And I think you could find some really great benefit to that. I will just as a final thought here say that if you would like to connect with me, my website is findmycenter.net, and if you click on the services tab of my webpage, there's a link at the bottom. I have 2 boxes: in person, which for most of you would be really difficult for you and I to meet in person right now. That's for local folks. But I have another box at the bottom of that page that says virtual meetings, and there's one of the links that's a free 30-minute consultation. You can click on that link. It'll take you directly to my confidential calendar page, and you can book a half an hour. And I would love to talk with you about any of these ideas and how these could get played out into your life, into your organization, in any of those ways. Or if you'd rather just email, there's my email address, scampbell@findmycenter.net. Or if you're more of a phone person, here's my personal cell phone number. You can reach out to me, and I've got an unlimited text plan. So, burn up the text lines or just call, and I'd love to connect with you about any of that. So thanks for your time. If there's any last questions, I'm happy to field those. Otherwise, I'll throw it back over to Jonathan he's got a minute and a half to wrap us all up together.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much. I just really love the simplicity of all this and these concepts, just so easy to grasp and I think apply. So yeah, thanks so much for this. So great. Yeah, I really encourage you guys to connect with Stephen more if you've got some follow-up questions or things that you want to talk about. Stephen also takes the Leadership Crucible and digs into it a lot deeper through some cohorts that he offers. So this is just the tip of the iceberg on some of this. So maybe this resonated with you and you thought, you know what, I'd like to dig in even deeper and be part of a cohort coming up. So be sure to ask him about those opportunities. Stephen, the last thing I'll do is just have you pray for this group, if you would. And with that, we'll be done. So would you pray for us?
Absolutely. God, we're so thankful that you are the one that we're following, and that we get to discover what it means to follow you as the unique individuals that you have created us to be. I thank you so much for each of these leaders that were here with us today, and the unique individual places in the world that you have placed them. I pray that today, we're not going to worry about tomorrow because you tell us not to, and we really try hard to not do that. But today, I pray that you would help each of them to have a sense that they are yours and you are theirs today. That they're right where they need to be, that even if it doesn't look perfect, that is actually beautiful, that they can keep moving and keep being who they have been designed and created to be right where they are with you this day. And we give you just incredible thanks that we don't have to do that without you, because we're just first followers. We thank you for that. Pray all this together today in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Stephen. Again, thanks everybody for being with us. Look for the follow-up material and have a great rest of the week.